Europe. Nina, welcome to you as well.
Thanks.
Let's talk a little bit about some of these changes that we saw today, this new European Commission lineup and what it means. I mean, some important posts that have been doled out. What's your initial take? What are your thoughts?
Well, from an economically liberal and kind of free trade perspective, it's the kind of best outcome that one could expect. It's also a great victory for the UK. Now, we've seen some of the key portfolios go to economically liberal countries. You got Sweden in charge of trade. You got Denmark in charge of competition. You have Poland in charge of the market, and perhaps most interestingly, you have the UK in charge of financial services. Now, that is something that's quite unexpected. There was a bit of speculation in the run-up to the new Commission that perhaps the UK would get the internal market without the financial services brief, but indeed it's a big victory for the UK.
What are your thoughts, Bob?
Well, the first thing is this is a big commission. We've now got 28 members, so they've had to restructure things, so you've got a sort of vice presidents supervising certain areas, and you've got loads of ex-prime ministers now as commissioners, which we haven't had before. So in some ways you consider this new commission quite a big hitting operation, and clearly it's going to concentrate on trying to make structural reform and growth. I mean, I think the European Commission has taken a step back during the crisis. I mean, it's been the ECB, it's been the Council of Ministers, it's been all the new stability pacts, it's been the new banking reform. The European Commission has been sort of sidetracked from this, so it's an opportunity now for the Commission to establish itself and deal with what might be called the third arrow of European reform, looking at the structural reform that's necessary and business. And as you say, the appointments in those areas which are crucial to doing that are interestingly with the Poles, which is now quite a powerful force within the Commission in terms of the President, Donald Tusk, and also in the position of the internal market, and other of the Eastern European countries have got good positions, considering some of them are quite small, which shows that the need now for concentrating on reform and growth rather than dealing with all the business of fiscal pacts. The minus, just to finish, the minus is that the French are in charge of fiscal pacts, and having just announced that they can't meet their own targets towards the 3%, I think this indicates to me that we're going to see a bit of a relaxation on trying to meet targets set by the fiscal pact, giving time for governments to get to it like France, big governments to get to it like France or Italy in terms of debt, and that's may help growth a little bit, but it's not good for structural reform and growth.
Would you agree with that? Do you think?
The interesting thing is that with this new structure of vice presidents, it means that the economic commissioner, the French economic commissioner, will have to report to one of the vice presidents, and now that's the fiscal hawk Kaitanen from Finland.
Yes.
So Juncker, when he was laying out the new commission today, he said that these vice presidents will have the power to block some of the proposals coming from the other commissioners. So perhaps Moscovici will be restricted in what he's able to do. We'll have to see.
How big was the rivalry and the fight for these top jobs, and also internally on a domestic basis?
Well, when it comes to European policy making and politics, there's always a certain amount of horse trading involved, and indeed, interestingly, with the position of France, Germany was said to be very opposed to France getting the econ portfolio, which they ended up getting. But that was part of a compromise, perhaps, with the UK getting financial services, and as we already discussed, a lot of the Eastern countries getting some of these vice president positions where they have a lot more clout, even though they're smaller countries. So compromise always has to be made.
Okay. Well, we were just talking about France and you know, them missing some of their targets. Just to recap, that France has indeed broken its fiscal promises once again. The country's finance minister, Mr. Sapin, is saying that it'll now take until 2017 to bring finances in line with EU rules. So that's what, 3 years down the line, right?
Yes, well, we'll see what they say when we get closer to that date.
That's always the way it goes. He previously said that his target would be hit by next year, so again, out to 2017 instead of next year. Sapin insisted that he was not looking to change the EU's rules, but he asked for the deteriorating economic conditions to be taken into account. Angela Merkel, however, has firmly rejected any hint of bending the rules, saying that Eurozone countries, they must stick to their commitments. Speaking in Parliament, she said that the European Commission is right to keep up the pressure for solid budgets, adding that what applies to Germany should apply to the rest of the bloc. Now, all of this happening just a day after the Italian Prime Minister Renzi warned that the economy would probably record no growth this year in Italy. Renzi's forecast is far lower than the government's previous prediction for a 0.8% increase. Is there a point to what Sapin was arguing, that, well, if things are deteriorating significantly in Europe, in the Eurozone, then it's okay to be a bit flexible on some of these targets?
Well, yes, there's that point, but how much deterioration are you prepared to take into account? I mean, we've been in a position the European economy is obviously flat, and in some countries is still contracting. France is more or less flat. But we'd also have to say, on the other side of the coin, they've done absolutely nothing about carrying through any reforms, long-term reforms, in terms of social security, pensions, labour market reforms, which would be necessary to give them the drive for growth. So what you'll end up with in the picture here is, I mean, I see the figure of 4.4%, I think, of GDP is the deficit for the government's, French government's budget this year. Next year, they're getting dramatic progress to 4.3%. And you can see that there isn't any progress, really, in these areas. And if they're to argue that this is because there is no growth, then the question is putting the chicken before the egg. What are they going to do about reforming both government and markets to ensure that they do get growth? And at the moment we see nothing from the French government. So I can see that the Germans are not necessarily going to excuse that as an argument.
Nina?
Certainly, I don't think the Germans will excuse that. We've seen some very tough language coming out of Berlin. And they'll also be watching very closely on what happens here in the UK, because, of course, with that referendum coming up, and if there were to be a Brexit, that would mean that the voting weights in the EU would change, so that this kind of liberal northern bloc, which includes Germany, would be outvoted by the southern bloc, which could, we already saw in the lead up to the Commission, whilst they were negotiating top jobs, the kind of Mediterranean bloc trying to outvote the northern bloc. So we'll have to wait and see. But Germany is not happy with France right now.
No, but I don't think Mrs. Merkel wants to pick a fight with Mr. Hollande at the moment, because I think we should get this commission going and see that it can provide some sort of positive momentum. It's early days.
It is early days, definitely.